you cannot see. Touch your skin and call your name. It's just the past that looks back at me. Left your home just to get away, but you took the buses with you. Set things up just to break them down. Keeps your mind down, nothing new. There's no inspiration. Media actually does. Gone up saviors. Government hunts them down. There's no inspiration. Media actually does. Gone up saviors. Government hunts them down. Yeah. All that's left for you to see is a reflection of myself. All that I've been for, been taken by someone else. Taken by someone else. Taken. Yeah. Watch out for TV, hot on dope. My night's Lucy reruns. Talk shows of the current hit. Sanction self-indulgent numb. Throw away what you got. Blame what's missing from your life. It's not your fault things worked out this way. It's someone's mother, daughter, wife. There's no inspiration. Media actually does. Gone home saviors. Government hunts them down. There's no inspiration. Media actually does. Gone home saviors. Government hunts them down. Yeah. All that's left for you to see is a reflection of myself. All that I've been taken by someone else. Taken by someone else. Taken. Yeah.
All right, all right. Good morning, everybody. Hello, hello. I am Jayme CheeseSlice, the producer engineer of Left on Left and Pasta to Go, as well as other shows like Truth Wire. Today, we're going to have Gloria Guillo and Jayme Kuzmarov talking about two articles written by Jayme. One about a massacre in Ukraine from 2014, and also some of the terror that's going on in Bangladesh. If it's the first time you've ever watched one of our streams, what we're doing here is we're actually recording a show for radio, and we're just showing you how it's done, all the behind the scenes stuff. So you're going to get to see the whole radio show as it is uncut. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on Gloria and Jayme. So hello, Gloria. How are you? And Jayme, our resident expert. Good to see you guys.
Hey, Jayme.
All right, if you're ready to go, I'm going to step out, and Gloria, you can take it away and start the show however you're ready to go. Let's do it.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Left on Left, where the left critiques itself and laughs out loud to keep from crying. I'm Gloria Guillo, a former administrator in New York City government, an investigative journalist, vice chair at WBAI Radio, and a co-founder of Green Renaissance Sovereign Rights Movement, a group so left it's right on. I'm joined here today by a resident expert, Jayme Kuzmarov. Jayme is a professor at Tulsa Community College, a historian, investigative journalist, and managing editor of Covert Action Magazine, an online magazine that focuses on CIA and deep state activity. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours and not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes. Listeners should form their own opinions. This presentation is not intended to incite, promote, or encourage any discriminatory or illegal activity. Today, we are going to discuss two articles written by Jayme that appear in Covert Action magazine. They are titled, Ukraine Found Complicit in 2014 Massacre by European Court of Human Rights, and two, U.S.-backed regime change operations has resulted in reign of terror in Bangladesh under darling of the Clinton Foundation, Mohammed Yunus. While these topics are indeed far apart in geography and time, they are in fact similar because they are both the product of the same CIA playbook that relies on the unconventional warfare designed by Gene Sharp, an academic whose theories on so-called nonviolent resistance became a blueprint for these movements. I say so-called because there are always extrajudicial killings, rapes, kidnappings, torture, and terror campaigns that can be witnessed now in Syria and Bangladesh and Ukraine. We often hear that color revolutions as uprisings for freedom, democracy, and justice. The narrative we're sold is that people rise up against brutal, oppressive regimes in a struggle for their rights. But the truth is, these revolutions aren't organic or born out of the people's will. They were instead carefully orchestrated by the CIA and State Department. Sharp's book, From Dictatorship to Democracy, is called a manual for nonviolent revolution. As mentioned, it is violent. It's just not violence involving massive American troop deployment. Covert warfare is done by the CIA. It's still warfare. It's just that it's accomplished with black, special, and psychological operations. Sharp wasn't operating in isolation. His theories were funded and supported by key predator class organizations, and one of the most influential and controversial of these was the national, and still is, the National Endowment for Democracy, NED. NED has long been portrayed as an organization dedicated to promoting democratic ideals worldwide, but NED has been exposed as a regime change tool, funneling money and resources into opposition groups, protests, and political movements in countries whose governments are seen as obstacles to U.S. interests. The NED, along with its various affiliates, has been directly involved in efforts to destabilize and overthrow governments that do not align with the geopolitical and economic priorities of the West. It's a tool used to push foreign policy agendas under the guise of promoting freedom and democracy. When governments are seen as insufficiently aligned with the West, color revolutions underpinned by sharp strategies and the funding of organizations like the NED become the perfect solution to bring about political change. These governments are always painted as authoritarian, the leaders vilified, and the narrative crafted to justify external interference. When these governments resisted privatization, refused to align with the Western trade policies, or sought to maintain control over their own resources, they became targets for regime change efforts. And the color revolutions were the method to do this and to shift the power to Western influence. These color revolutions were never about empowering the people. They were always about reshaping the world's political landscape in ways that served the economic and strategic interests of the West. And the NED, it wasn't a promoter of democracy. It was a facilitator and is a facilitator of regime change, using its resources to remove governments from power that didn't play by the West's rules. Okay, let's take it away, Jayme, with the details from your article. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Gloria. Yeah, I think that was very good remarks that you made. And yeah, I think a key color revolution that is often overlooked is one that occurred in Serbia. At the end of the Kosovo bombing, the NED was very active in mobilizing student activists. They often use students to make it seem like this, idealistic campaign. And often the leader they're targeting do have flaws. So there's not a lot of sympathy for them internationally or among the left or groups in the United States that traditionally oppose U.S. Military or covert military operations. And yeah, the propaganda campaigns are often very, very powerful. And as we discussed on this show, they, I think, increasingly are using alternative media as a tool to undercut any dissent. And I think Democracy Now! Is a key show uh, that presents this narrative of these protesters as these heroic, often students battling these oppressive dictatorships. And that's what we saw in Ukraine. Ukraine and Bangladesh are, well, in the Serbia case, you had targeted Slobodan Milosevic. Uh, and NED mobilized. The Otpor was a student activist group, and they were mobilized prior to an election. And then the NED's adjuncts were providing money to the opposition candidate, who basically, because Milosevic was promoting socialistic economic policies, he had tried to keep the Yugoslav Federation together. And so they wanted him removed, and they wanted to establish, a huge military base in the region and integrate the economies of the former Yugoslav Federation along capitalistic lines, integrate them into a common market, which Milosevic was resisting. So, and that underlying issue never addressed in outside media, who also vilified Milosevic, and there were negative things they can draw on about him. And if we look at Ukraine and Bangladesh, it's the same playbook. They mobilize student activists. They use international media to ramp up this vilification campaign and to present these, demonstrators as heroic. But in the case of Ukraine, they underplayed the role of fascists who were dominating or influential within that movement, and the larger geopolitical stakes, and how the U.S. wanted to use Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia, and to gain a foothold in the country so they can work to destabilize Russia and control Eurasia and its oil and gas wealth and advance U.S. imperialistic interests. And yeah, the case of Bangladesh we can discuss after. It was the same kind of playbook, and it was targeting a leader who was resisting overtures for U.S. military bases, and had drawn closer to China. So yeah, these geopolitical stakes are rarely addressed, including since we monitor Democracy Now! And they don't address these issues. Nor, of course, does the mainstream media. Occasionally, the broader geopolitical and economic interests of the United States come out in more conservative publication like Wall Street Journal, although of course they favor U.S. imperial intervention, but sometimes they do address the economic and larger geopolitical agenda at play. And that's at the root of what you're describing, Gloria, how the U.S. allies with these awful, often fascistic forces like in Ukraine, because they prefer hardliners, and it's going to be the right wing element that will sell out their country to foreign corporation and to a foreign power. The people who lack any morality, or just hardline extremists who will do the dirty work of killing Russians and Eastern Ukrainians, or killing off the opposition forces. That's really ultimately what they want. So they align. Again and again, we see horrific violence resulting from these kinds of operations. Destabilization of countries and horrific violence. And we can go into the case of Ukraine and the support for fascists and what they did in Odessa, if you like.
Well, one thing I just want to make clear is that it's kind of, in a way, irrelevant whether the United States thinks or portrays a particular leader of a country as being oppressive or not oppressive. I mean, these are sovereign countries, and it's not the United States' decision as to whether or not a sovereign country that has a president who is elected, by its people, has the right to remove them. So I think
Yeah,
that's,
and if I can add off that point,
please.
that the presentation of these leaders is totally caricatured, and it omits, firstly, governing countries is extremely difficult. There are always going to be injustices associated with, and many countries are, artificial colonial creation, like in the Middle East or Africa. They're dealing with disparate groups that were put together artificially in a country that are at odds with each other, and it's very difficult. And like, I've been researching the Assad government for a book I'm doing with Dan Kovalek, and looking back at Hafez al-Assad, and he was kind of a master at building coalitions with different minority groups, and through patronage, and he was able to sustain legitimacy for a long time. So he may be presented as an autocrat in the West, and there were certain autocratic features, but he was also very skilled at balancing the different minority groups and bringing some stability to that country, because they had not only colonialism but neo-colonialism, where the United States CIA, after the French were removed, the CIA orchestrated numerous coups in Syria in the 40s and 50s. And Assad set up, yes, a draconian security apparatus, but it was designed to coup-proof Syria and sustain the country's sovereignty. And you can look similarly, Gaddafi was a villain in the West. There were a lot of really positive things, and he also was very skilled at balancing the different minority groups. And in his case, he nationalized the oil of Libya and developed very good social programs, free education. The literacy rate got near 100% under Gaddafi, when it had been extraordinarily low before him. And he even paid for Libyans to travel abroad to study for free, so long as they came back to work to develop the country. So just some example, and the same with Assad. If you look into his government, there were a lot of very good programs he had in place that improved the quality of life for the population, and that sustained its legitimacy. He was seen as authentic nationalist. And many people worried that there may be certain things they don't like about him, but they're worried that the alternative would be a comprador leader who would compromise the country's sovereignty and security and allow the West to take over as it had in the past. So it's just a complete insensitivity to the perspective of those countries, and a totally one-sided and caricatured analysis that's put forward, even in alternative media. We found through our scrutiny of the Democracy Now! Program that it's just as bad or worse than the mainstream corporate media.
The other thing that we find is that when you have these regime change operations, what's usually left is this kind of power vacuum. And when you have this power vacuum, it's much easier for US corporations and foreign corporations to come in and seize assets, because the defense is gone. So that's this, confusion that happens is also very serving to special interests. And
Absolutely, yeah, and I would add the point that these are strong men. Sometimes, given the historical background, a strong man is a more effective leader for some of those countries like Syria, Libya, and that's how the people see it. That is not my analysis. That's how they see it. That they need a strong leader who will develop a powerful security apparatus to prevent exploitation by outsiders. And we see what's going on now in Syria, in that a weak state with Assad destabilized, the country is fragmenting and breaking up. And now these foreign predators, Turkey, Israel, and the United States, are just having a field day, ravaging the country and plundering it. Or look at the Congo, the weak country, and it's susceptible. It's rich in mineral wealth. Or Syria, Libya are rich in oil, and without a strong leader, they're susceptible to balkanization, foreign invasion, and plunder. So, as imperfect as an Assad and Gaddafi may be, under the circumstance, they're viewed as preferable and necessary for safeguarding sovereignty and control over their natural resources and wealth. And that's what people in the West often don't understand. And it's presented, of course, to them in a misleading way to ensure they don't understand that.
Another thing that keeps popping up, and we recently interviewed 2 journalists that are in Nicaragua, and what comes up very often is that there's a need to shut down some of these NED NGOs that try to incite violence by kind of using or misusing students, and a lot of this is basically this payola situation. So these governments have to keep certain NGOs outside. They have to regulate them as foreign entities, the same way the United States does. So, it's very important. So then the United States will turn around and say, "Oh, well, a country such as Nicaragua isn't really fair because they're not allowing certain press in." Well, the truth of the matter is they're not allowing certain NGOs and press in that's highly biased that causes disruption. So I think some of the things that might be considered authoritarian really aren't. They're defensive tactics used to keep these huge powers out of their countries and to maintain some autonomy. Wouldn't you say, Jeremy?
Yes, I would agree with that assessment. And also, yeah, they're accused of human rights violation when they imprison people who are branded by the NED and celebrated these heroic political prisoners, and even groups like Amnesty are prisoners of conscience. But often they're agents of the West who are trying to destabilize those countries and have carried out illegal or criminal activity. And you have, for instance, the NED, because I monitored their activity, was celebrating in Venezuela Leopoldo Lopez, who triggered an uprising in 2013 where they were carrying out violent attacks and Molotov cocktail of buildings and lynchings of pro-Hugo Chavez and socialists in Venezuela. So the crimes of which he was accused appeared to be legitimate crimes, and the same in Nicaragua, of these coup plotters who were, essentially treasonous. I mean, look at how we treated the January 6th, and we've shown on this show how the January 6th was exaggerated, and there was a lot of manipulation and foreign agents. And look at how they were treated here. They were given long prison sentences in some cases until they were exonerated by Trump. So how can you accuse, in the case of Nicaragua or Venezuela or other countries, they're facing, in that case, it's not the feds infiltrating. These are real right-wing extremists. And many of them, like Leopoldo Lopez, has an extreme fascistic ideology. He has a connection with the extremist anti-communists from the Cold War era. His family is from like the nobility in Spain. So these are extreme right-wingers of the wealthiest classes, and they're backed by foreign interests, and they're inciting violent insurrections. So if that occurred in the United States, they would be treated even more harshly than the January 6th protesters. So how can you condemn those governments? And yeah, excesses may occur, but that is the whole playbook, the whole strategy of the CIA and U.S. power elite is to trigger these uprisings and then make the government look bad by carrying out inevitably draconian response, because any state in the face of a foreign-backed insurrection is going to respond harshly to that. And often it's impossible for the leader to control the security forces. Any army or police, when you incite them, there are elements who are going to carry out excesses. And yeah, it's true, the leaders can sometimes inflame them by branding all the rioters in certain language. But this is the playbook. And then they look terrible in the international media. And then they fund these opposition media to play up their human rights abuses. And they use these NGOs to broadcast. Human Rights Watch comes out with a report about how terrible Assad was in cracking down on these foreign jihadist uprisings. Of course, they leave out that it was a violent uprising led by jihadists, or in Venezuela by these right-wing extremists. And then this government looks terrible, and that is designed to further mobilize people against them, whether internationally or in that country. They target the people in that country, and we've seen in some cases they're false flagged, like in Ukraine. And yeah, if we can get into the Odessa massacre now, I mean, the first phase in the Maidan was that there was a false flag attack where these intelligence agents, 3 from Georgia and 1 was an American Special Forces operative, Brian Boyanger, who'd been in Iraq, shot at the protesters, but it was set up to make it look like it was Yanukovych's government, the pro-Russian legally elected leader who the uprising was designed to overthrow. So it made it look like he was the one who shot at them, but really it was set up by U.S. intelligence as part of a false flag operation. And that occurs a lot in these major events like the 2018 Nicaragua uprising and the 2013-14 Venezuelan Guarimba revolt. So that's all part of the playbook, but they want to elicit this harsh reaction so they can demonize them and they can ramp up the propaganda, and they want martyrs. They want people dead, and that will arouse the anger of the crowd, and then it push the momentum for overthrow.
You gave me a big question to ask you. I'm going to read it. Many in the Democratic Party and left continue to support aid to Ukraine and criticize Trump for humiliating Ukraine's leader, Zelensky, at the White House a few weeks ago. Recently, the European Court on Human Rights issued a ruling about the Odessa massacre that was ignored in U.S. media, including alternative media, with the exception of the Gray Zone and World Socialist website. What is the significance of the European Court's ruling, and how does it help explain the origins of the war in Ukraine with Russia that many liberals remain oblivious to this day? Why the censorship over this in mainstream and alternative media? Thank you.
Well, that's a good question, and the latter part may be a bit harder to answer. The first part, yeah, just so listeners are aware of what the court ruled and what happened. I mean, what happened, yeah, so you had the violent uprising. It should be noted that against Viktor Yanukovych, who is the pro-Russian legally elected leader of Ukraine. It should be noted that when the protests broke out, they were trying to get enough signatures for impeachment, but they didn't get enough. So this was a blatant coup, and there are actually elections scheduled for the next year. So if they were intent on changing the direction of Ukraine, they could have planned for the forthcoming elections and tried to get a popular candidate in. However, it looks like they didn't. I mean, Yanukovych probably would have won the next election because he was spurning an IMF agreement that was very unpopular, that would have pushed austerity on Ukraine. And he wanted to keep good relations with Russia because Ukraine, is a neighbor of Russia and benefited economically from trade, especially the eastern part of Ukraine. But he was a popular leader. They couldn't get enough votes. I can't predict what would have happened in that election, but if they didn't have enough signatures for impeachment, and then they had to resort to violent methods to overthrow him, then they hunted down his supporters. And that Maidan insurrection, which was supported by the CIA and the EU, included many neo-Nazi and fascist elements who worshipped Stepan Bandera, a Nazi collaborator during World War II. And it was the leader that the U.S. Yanukovych actually was against Bandera. His predecessor, who had come in an earlier U.S.-backed color revolution, Viktor Yushchenko, had rehabilitated Bandera's image. And then what happened to the neo-Nazi groups, there were protests in different parts of Ukraine, and supporters of Yanukovych were trying to mobilize after this illegal coup. And then the neo-Nazi groups started attacking them. And in Odessa, and this was planned and supported by the Ukrainian new post-coup government and by its American backers. They wanted to intimidate these pro-Yanukovych anti-coup groups. So they sent in these neo-Nazis, led guy, I think it's in the article who the leader was, I think Beletsky, who was a known neo-Nazi. The Ukrainian government sent him in deliberately to attack the anti-coup protesters, and who are more leftist, pro-Russian, and in the eastern Ukrainian town of Odessa. Then they chased them into a trade union building, and then they set fire to the building. And there were some heinous atrocities, like killing of pregnant women. And they even put Nazi graffiti on the wall. And when people tried to escape the building, they would be beaten. Some were soccer hooligans who were, skinheads, and they came out and beat up people who were trying to escape the building. And they were cheering on the burning of the building and the killing of at least 50 people. Now the court, years later, ruled for some, although it's a very small amount of compensation, but they did rule in favor of something like 100,000 euro compensation for the victim. So that's a significant ruling, because the European court had been heavily biased against Russia, but it acknowledged wrongdoing against the victims of that, and the wrongdoing by these neo-Nazi groups that were tied with the Ukrainian government and supported by the Ukrainian government. And the ruling pointed out that the police and fire service were negligent, that they didn't come to help the victims. They deliberately withheld support, and the authorities didn't carry out a proper investigation of this massacre, and nobody was held accountable. So this is a moral outrage, and it shows how the war started, because these groups were attacking these elements in eastern Ukraine who legitimately opposed a coup and were mobilizing peacefully to try and counter that. And ultimately, they voted in referendum for their autonomy. They were being violently attacked. And this was a prelude to the invasion of eastern Ukraine by the Ukrainian military. But since a lot of the Ukrainian youth didn't want to fight their own people in eastern Ukraine, they had to rely on these militias. They formed these militias that were financed by private Ukrainians, and some, I believe, through the CIA. I believe that Burisma was a CIA front with Hunter Biden on its board, as well as Cofer Black, who was the number 3, the CIA. That company was controlled by Ihor Kolomoisky, a warlord close with Zelensky, who was raising funds for these right-wing militias, who were used to do the dirty work to attack the people of eastern Ukraine, who were resisting the coup and voted for their autonomy. And that's ultimately, they begged for Russian intervention to save them from these Nazi barbarians. And they started shelling and bombing. The Obama administration began providing more and more weaponry as they shelled and bombed eastern Ukraine, and the people had to live in underground often for long periods. The kids couldn't go to school, and these Nazi militias were carrying out atrocity, tortures, and brutalities, feeding off that Odessa massacre that they were never held accountable. They were basically allowed free reign There was no accountability. So then the second part of the question is, why is this not reported? I mean, this was a big ruling by a official body, in Europe, that confirmed the narrative of those of us on the dissenting side were saying all along, that something is horrible going on in Ukraine. They were pointing attention to the empowerment of these neo-Nazis and the negative effect of the coup. But these voices were on the margins, on the fringe, couldn't get a voice in mainstream or alternative media, and they're still censoring the story. And the liberals and left have been the most zealous proponents of the war in Ukraine, and it's the far right, who, for whatever reason, has had second thoughts about this now. And it should be noted that Trump supported Ukraine when his first presidency. He ramped it up to providing Javelin anti-tank missiles. When Obama administration was providing what it said was non-lethal military aid, although really it was pretty lethal, and things like drones. But Trump escalated
And
it to
bioweapon labs.
yeah. So I mean, Trump, is complicit in the whole thing as well. But I think whatever reason, a lot of his base started to question what was going on here and the waste of taxpayer dollars. So he's starting to, although how sincere he is, because at least he's starting some negotiations, and the liberals are going crazy over that. And so, I mean, that's why the spectrum is so out of kilter here, because the liberal left historically was more pacifistic, more critical of U.S. Military and covert military operations.
You gave me one of our favorite questions. What is Bernie Sanders' position on all of this, and why do more and more real leftists see him as a disgrace?
Well, I wrote a piece on Sanders on my Substack that Jayme may be able to put up, and I was disgusted. He published an article on Counterpunch after the Trump-Zelensky meeting, where Trump, gave Zelensky the cold shoulder, attacking Trump on that, but just repeating all these false Russophobic narrative that we've heard for the last 10 years. That, oh, Russia. I mean, omitting the entire history I was just going on, and say, "Oh, Russia is the aggressor," but saying all these things that are known to be false, like he said, "Oh, Russia interfered in the 2016 election." Well, the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, Russia was accused of colluding with WikiLeaks to leak certain email that made Hillary Clinton look bad. The irony is that actually it was the DNC that plotted against Sanders. And he's using this Russophobic red baiting to spin it that Russia undermined that election, when in fact the veteran intelligence professionals for sanity did a study using an IBM expert who found, based on study of the computer speed, that the leaks came from within the United States, not Russia. And that was the way Russia was accused of interfering in that election. So it's been disproven, and everything, his diatribe is just filled with false allegation after false allegation, and completely omitting what I was describing: the coup, how that was carried out, how it triggered the war, how these Nazi groups attacked the people of eastern Ukraine, carried out these massacres. There was no under the cover of the Ukrainian government installed in the coup, and how that laid the groundwork for the war. That he blames all on Russia. He claimed that Ukraine is this model democracy. He's saying that, when we know, and we've reported on this show, and it's established fact, that firstly, Zelensky has canceled elections. So that's not a model democracy. He stayed well past his term. Number one. Number two, we know for a fact that he banned 12 political parties. We know for a fact that he assassinated political opponents, including, and Sanders, they attack him, how screwed up American politics is, and that the Republicans attack him as a radical socialist. Yet when an actual socialist got killed, because the head of the Socialist Party in Ukraine's parliament, Ilya Kiva, was hunted down and assassinated in a park in Moscow, and the Zelensky government and his henchmen gloated about assassinating him.
Well, I think we also
And
have to
Sanders
always.
had nothing to say. If he's a socialist, he would have the outrage that they're hunting and killing socialists. But he's praising that government and claims it's a model democracy when they're
Well,
hunting its opponents, killing them, when there's gulags full of people imprisoned in Ukraine, and that's for him a model democracy. So
well,
something is off about this guy who supported Ukraine to the hilt and NATO, is a disgrace.
well, I think it's also important to bring it on home. I mean, Jeremy is on a kill list because of his articles on Ukraine. So I think, that's something. Who else is on this kill list? Could you
Yeah,
describe
that's
it a
not a
little bit?
model democracy. In whose universe is that a model democracy? So I have to question the intellectual integrity is vanished from this individual who says that. And there
Talk
are
about the
people
kill
like
list.
Henry Kissinger on that. Well, he's now deceased, but there are conservative military analysts who argued that this was leading to a dangerous escalation with Russia and could lead to a military war, world war. Edward Lookback, who I think long worked for the CIA, the conservative military analyst, said that, so they put him on the hit list. Scott Ritter is a Marine intelligence officer who was the UN weapons inspector, who exposed the WMD, based on his firsthand observation. He should be regarded as a national hero. And then he was critical of U.S. policy in Ukraine. So, I mean, off the top of my head, I know he's on the list. I know Edward Lookback. I know Henry Kissinger was on the list because they went even too far for Henry Kissinger. Because in Kissinger's days, they used to meet with the Russians and negotiate with them. And Kissinger favored some arms control treaties. But Trump tore up that treaty, and Biden followed that policy. So Kissinger had some sensible critiques in old age, and so they put him on that list.
Yeah, but
So I mean,
also
this
our
is
dear
ridiculous.
Jeremy Kuzmarov, a Tulsa dad.
Yeah. So, and they put me on the list because there was an event that I covered about that list. There was a press conference with Scott Ritter and some other people who were on the list. I believe Ray McGovern was on the list, the 27-year CIA analyst. And he's the founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and is a man of very high integrity. So they held a press conference, and I covered it and did an article, so they put me on the list, the sin of reporting on it.
Crazy, crazy. I think maybe we should move a little bit to Bangladesh if you're
Okay, and I
finished
just
with,
want to mention this New York
yeah,
Times article
okay.
this week was very important because it showed a very expanded U.S. role in Ukraine. That this is really a U.S. war. The U.S. has played a very integral role in this war, as this kind of insider account reveals. And there's a lot of information about that in that article. I mean, we know that the CIA has helped to develop the Ukrainian drone industry. We know the CIA set up 12 bases in Ukraine after the Maidan coup. And this article just goes into the Wiesbaden base in Germany and how that was a center of coordination of military operations for Ukraine into Eastern Europe and into Russia. And the Ukrainian army brass was working with top American generals to plan all the military operations. And there was a general, Christopher Donahue, mentioned as a key figure, and he has a background, in a lot of the dirty operation the U.S. has been involved in, going back to Iraq and Afghanistan. So, I mean, if the anti-war movement was against the Iraq war, why aren't they against this? It's the same people running death squad and operations into Russia, antagonizing a powerful a country that hasn't been invaded since Nazi Germany, and it's a failed war. I mean, just like Iraq and Vietnam, Russia has gained the upper hand. Clearly, they've taken over a lot of territory in Ukraine. So, I mean, what has American got out of this? And that's why a lot of red rib conservatives are the one asking those questions. Why aren't people on the left The left is the one who's supposed to be concerned about the government spending for healthcare, for education. If they're spending 300, $500 billion on a Vietnam type quagmire that's involving dirty operations using these generals who are known as special forces assassins, that's as ugly as it gets. And yet you have Bernie Sanders cheerleading for this war and AOC, and you have no anti-war movement. These student protesters are clueless about this, and they're only on Israel Gaza. They say nothing about this horror show. And that's why they alienate themselves from Middle America. If they had a consistent message, a lot of Middle America doesn't like their taxpayer money going into these wars. They may want a more limited government, but they want a government that works for the public. If that's the message of the anti-war movement, they can win a lot of support in Middle America and be a formidable movement. Instead, you have them chanting Intifada, wearing masks. They're not going to win over Middle Americans. So the whole thing pisses me off. But
I just wanted to also end the the arrest and murder of Gonzalo Liro, who is a podcaster, and he was giving a lot of great reports. And they hunted him down, arrested him, and basically put him into conditions that compromised his health, and then didn't give him medical treatment, and he passed away in Ukraine,
Ukraine's prison
in a
gulag, and
prison.
what's this, Bernie Sanders considers a model democracy when foreign journalists are dying. And they were all about Navalny and how he died in a supposedly brutal Russian prison. And again, I don't know the circumstances. It's likely maybe they were bad, but the U.S. intelligence concluded that Putin did not order Navalny's death. But if they want to be consistent, why aren't they discussing Gonzalo Lira? And the whole thing is a fraud. And I think people look to Bernie Sanders as somebody different from the norm, but he's shown to be just another phony. And that's why we need independent political organizing and movements away from the Democratic Party, form our own organic movements with a clear-headed analysis of world affairs. And hopefully our show can help.
Thank you. Okay, let's go on to Bangladesh. We only have about 10 minutes left. We got a lot to cover in Bangladesh.
Okay, we might have to discuss it more the next time, but I think people should be more aware about what's going on here, whatever their political leanings, because it showed the pernicious nature of U.S. imperial intervention. Because you had the leader who was overthrown, Sheikh Hasina, with the daughter of Bangladesh's founder, and it was a violent insurrection and coup, and the NED had poured a huge amount of money into Bangladesh. And she was a target because she was aligning more with China, and she wasn't allowing. U.S. wanted to build some military bases and have military exercises, and she didn't want that. And so the coalition that overthrew her was led by Islamic extremists and fundamentalists. Those presented in Western media, Democracy Now, with these heroic students. And the figurehead they put in was Muhammad Yunus, who was a darling of the Clinton Foundation. He had promoted all these microfinance loans, which supposedly help the poor. But I mean, the global elite likes this approach because it means it's loans that could help small scale entrepreneurs form a business. Now, but that they like that
In
approach.
theory.
In theory, yeah. And if we go into it,
The reality is very different.
The reality is that the loans he
different.
gave, this guy is a crook and loan shark. He provided actually loans that had very high interest rates, and they had to pay it back starting in 7 days. Who can start a business in 7 days? And there's a great documentary. I learned about this through a wonderful documentary by Tom Heineman, who traveled in villages and interviewed people who got these loans. And many of them were destitute and crying. They had to sell their homes. A lot had to move to the capital, Dhaka, to try and make a living, to pay their very heavy in debt. And because they couldn't pay the loan in 7 days, they had to take out more loans to pay the debt. And these unscrupulous loan sharks were involved, and some mafia related. And if you don't pay, they can harm your family. So people were plunged into debt. It didn't help people. Eunice actually stole a lot of money and was accused of embezzlement and tax evasion. I believe tax evasion. I don't want to slander him if it wasn't embezzlement. Uh, and then the global elite generally favors that approach because it means they don't, a more left-wing approach would be to raise taxes on the wealthy, provide good social services, schools, healthcare, build up road and transportation networks from rural areas to help their economies, land reform and redistribution, wealth redistribution. But this approach of microfinance, you don't have to do that. So it doesn't touch the pocketbook of the elite. The elite can still pay low tax, exploit their workers. And the other thing would be to raise wages and force wage levels up, in sweatshops and multinational corporations. Instead, the global elite won't champion that because the wealthy don't want to pay more in taxes. They don't want any wealth redistribution, so they favor the microfinance loan approach. But it's largely a sham. And so now he's the head of the government. He was celebrated. And disgracefully, Democracy Now!, their segment after he came to power, said nothing about what I'm saying about how these loans plunged people into debt and how Eunice himself was under investigation for corruption. They just praised him as some great leader. And he's going to impose more and more neoliberal paradigm for Bangladesh, which is a failure for poor countries like that, time and time again. And he's empowered these Islamic extremists who are now committing pogroms targeting the Hindu population in Bangladesh. They're desecrating Hindu monuments. There have been reports of lynchings. There's no freedom of the press at all. And it's a nightmare. And I compare it in my article to Syria, which is another nightmare where Al Qaeda was empowered by the CIA operations in Syria and U.S. Bombing, empowered the Al Qaeda, which is carrying out ethnic cleansing operation targeting the Shiite Alawite population of Syria. And there are reports of tens of thousands of deaths since December, and massacres going on in Syria. And this new government in Syria is horrific, like in Bangladesh. So it relates, brings back to what you're saying at the beginning of the show. These color revolutions have just horrifying consequences for the people of those societies and empower these vicious extremist forces. And how long will America continue to support their taxpayer dollar funding this? And when will people develop some compassion and empathy for the people of those societies who have to live under these horrible conditions, and that they have a right to choose their own governments, that we don't pick the right governments for them time and time again. And enough is enough. And where is anybody speaking out against this on the left? Sanders, AOC, they have nothing to say. And that's why, again, we need independent political organizing against this kind of policy. And channeling our resources into developing our economy and the welfare of our people, not destroying foreign nations.
The other thing that comes out is this expertise in regime change and color revolutions always ends up back home. And, a lot of things that happen here in the United States are almost right out of the playbook, as far as different approaches. I mean,
Yeah.
the COVID narrative, for one, was really inflated. It resulted in a huge transfer of wealth. It crashed local businesses, had homes foreclosed on. And then we look at things that are right here and now. I mean, the interest rates on houses and, homes is very high, which leads to increased rates of foreclosure and bankruptcy, as well as, high medical expenses leads to bankruptcy. So these things also, we need to look at here. They're using these tactics on us. Wouldn't you
Yeah,
agree?
and you're very good at identifying this. And I think one way they do it is that they do the same thing in foreign countries here, where they set up front groups. And you have to be suspicious a lot of the activism here because it's as you call it, a targeted opposition, a controlled opposition. They set up front groups, and that's what they do in foreign nations. And it has this nice packaging, so it looks like, oh, it's human rights group, or it's opposition media, and they're exposing corruption. They're doing God's work. But actually, it has a larger agenda, a very sinister underlying agenda to destabilize that country. And the same technique may be used here. And a lot of the activist groups, a lot of these alternative media we spotlight, they're like ones NED sets up in other countries. And really, they're controlled opposition, and it's designed to channel people into certain kinds of activism that has a cause, maybe divide and conquer. In the case of the United States, I think the strategy of the oligarchy that carried out these policies is to divide the people, divide and conquer, keep them divided and weak. So they play up race over class issues because that'll divide. They'll prevent. What scares the elite is what Martin Luther King was building. That's why they had to assassinate him, an interracial coalition of the working and middle class to challenge the corporate-dominated oligarchy and reorient U.S. foreign policy in a more peaceful direction. That's what they don't want. So they'll set up activist network that play up race over class, that prevent that. That also media networks that seem to be oppositional, but when it comes to foreign regime change, they promote the company line and channel, they channel any activism away from that. And then we can debate why they may be by design, they want people only focused on Israel-Palestine, because that's a very divisive issue. And it alienates some in the Jewish population that historically were part of the left, like in the 60s in the SDS. And they deliberately maneuvered to break up SDS by playing up the Palestinian issue in SDS. And in that case, it's not to say that the Palestinians don't have a legitimate cause, but there are some underlying agendas. So we should be wary of that. People should be smarter. And I think you've helped educate me a bit on this topic. So I think we have to get that information out there, and people just have to be attuned to how they can manipulate activist movements in a dangerous direction, and how there's a parallel between what they do abroad. And you're right, it's often the same operatives, the same foundations and money, and it's a kind of social engineering that's going on here as well.
We do see the Tides Foundation very busy, which is one of the Soros-controlled organizations domestically, and then we see Open Society very active internationally. So we do see this. We also see the Ford Foundation, Carnegie involved in domestic and foreign affairs.
Yes.
Well, I think we're coming to the end of the show. We got the little wrap it up message from Jayme. Jeremy, please tell our audience how they can follow your important cutting edge work and financially support your efforts.
Yes, please go to my Substack, Too Hot for the Mainstream. If you become a paid subscriber at just $5 a month, that really helps keep me able to pay my bills. And Covert Action Magazine has a fundraising drive now. And, Covert Action Magazine has a good track record, I think, of exposing these color revolutions and CIA crimes going back to the 1970s. It's hard. Online independent journalism is difficult. It's not developed good financial models yet. And so it's really a struggle to pay staff adequately, the growing cost of living. So just a small amount, the Covert Action asked for a $25. All the articles are free, but we ask that readers subscribe for $25 a year. And if you can afford more, obviously we would appreciate it. And my Substack is just $5 a month. And if I can get a lot of subscribers, that will keep me being able to write these kind of articles and hopefully help to educate people and build some kind of independent movement in the country that we need.
And we would both be remiss if we didn't say we need to raise funds for WBAI. And
Absolutely.
you can go to the website, you can call, you can donate. It's very important. And for our show, Left on Left, you can become a WBAI Left on Left buddy. And that would help our show, and it would also help WBAI. Thank you so much. That wraps up our show for today. This is Left on Left. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like, donate, and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week.
Okay, that looks like that'll be a wrap for today.
All right.
I was looking for the kill list that you're talking about, and I'm pretty
That's
sure,
the Moret's website.
I'm pretty sure this is the website, but I think they've scrubbed most of the Americans off of it. But
they may have by now, yeah.
Yeah, they may used to, but I think one of the important things to notice here is look up in the top right.
Oh, look, they have Gonzalo Lira.
I did find.
Thank you.
They like celebrate people's death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
usually they put a circle or a line across the face. Though.
Yeah,
that's why I was surprised they don't have it on him, because they did get him.
Anyway, I got to run because I got other stuff to do. But
okay,
good show, all right, Gloria, and thanks.
Thank you, Jayme. Yes, definitely.
Good job.
Thanks.
Yeah, next week you have a guest.
Jayme.
I saw, so that's good. And then the week after that, we'll do the Oklahoma City bombing.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Jayme.
All right. Take care, guys. Thanks again, Jayme. Great job.
So I wanted to just point out one thing here. When you look at this website, though, look at the top right corner and who's hosting it. Langley, Virginia.
Yeah, we know.
I mean, well, a lot of people in the audience might not know.
Yeah, that's where the CIA is headquartered. So, Langley.
Right. Like, this is supposed to be a Ukrainian supported website, and Langley is behind it.
Yeah.
And it's right there on their own website.
Yeah, it's silly. It's just, I mean, I don't even know what word to use, but it's just the arrogance and the, it's just, it is just over the top, and people wanting to believe, that their government is good and that, what's going on is the right thing is just,
I do want my government to be good. I want government to be good. And I believe government can be good, but not ours. Ours is not a good government. We
need to work on it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do, but they don't want us to. Then they'll punish people like us for.
Well, we get a lot of
change things and make it better.
Well, that's why we need donations. People put the money in, because we are we are shadow banned. We are demonetized. We
also need the blood, sweat, and tears of people to be put into as well.
True.
It's just like we're going up against people who lie, cheat, steal, and kill to protect their power and do what they want, and nothing's off the table. So it's like they fight they fight dirty, and if you're not willing to step up to this at the same level, I don't think you can succeed. So
well, I don't think we're going to go on a kill spree here. So
no, I'm not talking about that.
I mean, the best thing we can do is just educate our audience and bring them information. And we always say this, and it's very important. We don't have a position that we want people to adopt. What we want to do is create a space where people have the opportunity to hear various viewpoints and then to do their own research and come to their own conclusions.
And
so
what I want is to just
our goal.
Place all these people in government. Like they all got to go. We got to get rid of these neocons.
But if they're all funded by Israel, what are you going to do? I mean, that's a problem.
Well, that's got to go too. All of it. I mean, just replace it. It's like my analogy of our government is like if I owned a computer repair shop and you brought your computer into me, and the American government was a computer, you've got four options. Things you can do. I mean, one, we can try to go in and fix all the problems with it one at a time, and just make the computer work again. Well, this computer, the American government computer, is so corrupt and so bad. I'm not going to do that, because that would take weeks. It would cost way too much money to fix that. So I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to do that option. I'm going to give you two other options, but you're probably going to take the third one. The second option is we're going to get all your important information off of it. We're going to take that aside, and then we're going to reinstall the government. And or reinstall the operating system and so we're going to wipe everything clean and then put your information back on there. But then we're also going to install a lot of anti-corruption software to make sure that what happened to the computer as you brought it into me doesn't happen again. The other option, the second option, or this would be actually the third option, would be we're going to take that computer, get any important files you need off it, then we're going to take the computer and throw it out the window, and then we're going to get a whole new computer. Now, I'm not a big fan of this option, but I still prefer to the first option. But I prefer the second option the best, because at least that way you get a whole new government or a new operating system. And
Well,
then we can save some of the stuff from before.
I like the technical, analysis. I think
Well,
that's
but this is how I would do it. If I had a computer repair shop and you brought a computer into me in the same state as like the U.S. government is, this is what I would do. So I would give you those two options. Options 2 and 3, I think, are the best, the most preferred option. But what you're going to do is take option number 4. You're going to say, okay, I understand this computer is a real big mess. You're going to take the computer back home and continue using it without doing anything. That's what we do with our government. It's the operating system, the government is so messed up, it's screwed up, but we're not doing anything about it to fix it. We're just like, oh, well, it's just how it is. We're going to keep using it. Look, corrupt systems always end up crashing. It's just a matter of time. And our system is completely corrupt. It runs on corruption, which means it cannot continue running forever. I don't want to live in a system where it comes to a crash, because that's bad for everybody. I want to fix the problems before the crash happens so people's lives aren't completely destroyed, because that's what's going to happen when this government finally does crash, and it will happen. Now, when? I don't know. It could be 5 years. It could be 50 years.
well.
But
The one
it's
thing
going to crash.
the one thing I want to say is that there are many that believe that crashing the system is another way to exploit the impoverished, the working class, the middle class. And when you look at the stock market as a comparison, the stock market goes up as stairs, but it goes down as an elevator. And many people, like your Warren Buffetts, your Soros, made a tremendous amount of money on kind of negative betting using the stock market on basically crashing the system. So when the systems crash, there's a extreme redistribution of wealth that occurs, and people who have the inside track and know how to bet against the economy tend to become billionaires overnight, or multi-billionaires.
Well, they've already got the capital, so when the crash happens, the prices of everything drops, and then they can buy up everything, and then they own it, and then they can extract rents from it in perpetuity after that.
So there is some logic for the predator class to crash the economy. And then also, when you have this confusion of something like this happening, it's even easier to take away and to grab assets and things. So a lot of people have this kind of feeling that, oh, well, the whole thing should just crash and everything will be better. And what I'd like to say is experience and studying all of these color revolutions and these crashes in government has shown that that's where the biggest redistribution of income occurs. Well, and it ain't good. It ain't good.
It's not just a crash that needs to occur. What needs to happen is the leaders running everything need to be completely discredited, so they are ousted by the people and replaced. Right. It's not just a crash. But the crash has to be attributed to the leadership.
But the problem with the leaders is that they're puppets. I mean, the real leadership is never elected.
I know,
and it doesn't matter whether you have, and we say this often, it doesn't really matter if you have a Trump or a Biden. The people behind the scenes are the same. And these are just narratives that calm a particular base of people, but the actual policies are very similar. And, I've had this thing that I've always wanted to say, so I'll say it right now. It's a story that someone told me, and it's kind of, it's not a joke. It's kind of a story, but I don't know how I'd word it. But it's where you basically have a bad situation and you go to a priest or a rabbi, it doesn't matter, someone, and you say, hey, I have this terrible problem, my family's a mess, my income's terrible, everything's horrible in my life. What do I do? And that, person in authority suggests that you bring a goat into your house. And the person hearing this information goes, a goat? Why do I need a goat? Oh my God, why a goat in the kitchen? Like, why would I bring a goat in the house? Just do it. So the guy goes back home, brings a goat into the house. The goat's in the house for like about a month. Things are even worse now. Things are so terrible. So then he comes back to the, rabbi, priest, whatever, and says, hey, the goat has made my life even more miserable. Now what do I do? And they say, take the goat out. So then he's like, okay. So he goes back home, takes the goat out, and all of a sudden things are better. So I think that's really the handoff between your Biden and your Trump, or your Trump and your Biden, or whatever it is this concept of the goat. And the goat can be manifest as the trans agenda. Could be whatever it could be, whatever it is.
Something that irritates people, and then you get rid of
and then
it.
they remove that, and everyone's like, oh great, now we have the goat out of the kitchen, but nothing has changed. Nothing. And I think a lot of the enthusiasm for Trump is simply he took the goat of the trans narrative and men in sports and women's sports and men in women's prisons. He took that goat out, and people are kind of
it's more complicated than that. I mean, you could, but the DEI, all the woke stuff, I think
exactly. It's the goat. It's the goat. Nothing has changed. Just the goat's out of the kitchen. So, that's kind of my view on the political system using that example.
Well, when I say the leadership needs to be discredited, I really mean the ruling class, the real power behind our elected officials, and the people that run our government need to be people who do not serve that class of people, the real leaders. We all look at Elon Musk as the face of the billionaire class and the oligarchs, but I think he's one of the lesser ones. He's just a public face. I mean, my gut tells me there's bigger, more powerful people than him, but we don't know who they are.
Yeah, we do. But, let's not go into it here. We do know who they are. And, it's a combination of the tech titans as well as, I do think he has power.
He does, but I think he's one of the lesser ones. I don't think he's at the top of the heap.
I think the CIA has kingmakers. They use In-Q-Tel to make kings.
Yeah.
With the blessing of one company over the other, and In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's venture capitalist arm, for those who might not know about In-Q-Tel, you have your Peter Thiels and those people who are, were made kings. They're, whatever they do is blessed, and whatever, isn't blessed just vanishes. And, you could look at something as simple as the competition between MySpace and Facebook. Facebook was blessed. MySpace wasn't. Boom.
Well, I remember those days, and I was on MySpace first, and everybody's using it. The reason Facebook got blessed was because Facebook just worked better, and it was a cleaner system.
Well, Facebook was founded. The first investor in Facebook, the first and major investor in Facebook, was Peter Thiel. Also, the Mark Zuckerberg thing, when I looked into it, seemed extremely suspicious.
Oh, that is.
I mean, he miraculously was taught code by this teacher who I couldn't locate.
Well,
there's a lot of stuff you don't hear.
Well, he also screwed over the partners he was working with to build.
Well, that was kind of irrelevant. I mean, the point is, they said that he developed this code in his dorm room, basically. And when you look into it, his father had a tutor for him that was teaching him code.
But he didn't do it alone. He absolutely didn't do it alone.
Well, I'm not suggesting he did it alone, but there was always a hand guiding this, and there was always a direction. And basically, Facebook came in as another software was done away with, because they felt that this other software, Total Awareness, I forgot the name of it, I think it's called Total Awareness, that they were phasing that out at the same time that Facebook came in. And the reason for that, their phase out of this total awareness software, is because people thought it was Orwellian, and they didn't want all their information controlled in one place. So Facebook came along and encouraged people with a good marketing gimmick. People were told, hey, you put your information in Facebook, you'll get laid, you'll get girls, you'll get
it was all
boys, you'll
about
get
just
whatever you
rating
want.
chicks on campus.
You'll get whatever you want. So
That's
all
what
of
it
a
was about.
sudden, people just, relinquished their most valuable asset, which is their privacy. They just gave it up. And, the CIA and the deep state and the DOD were just going, wow, this is amazing. We have such granular information on people. We know everything they like. We know everything they don't like. We know everything about them because people put in their education, their relationships. People even put in their health. And,
their
it's
hobbies, their interests.
it's extremely granular.
Yeah.
And
Well, Facebook was so much better it was a better service for the user, though. And I think that's more why it became bigger than MySpace, because MySpace was a mess. You'd go to somebody's profile page and like music would start blaring. There'd be just it was old internet, right? There'd just be random GIF images all over the place. And it was not a good user experience. And I think that's why a lot of people left MySpace to go to Facebook, because MySpace was completely customizable to its own detriment, where Facebook was a lot more controlled in its presentation. So everybody's profile picture profiles would look the same. So when you went and looked at people, you'd get a similar experience each time, which is a much better user experience. So, I mean, I think I agree with you with what Facebook has become.
No,
But
it's what it started at.
I don't think that's how it started.
origins.
I think it was more of
I'll
like,
send you an article to read.
I think it was
A
more
few
of like
them.
an opportunist to jump on it. They saw where Facebook was going, and then
Okay,
took it over.
I'll send you some articles, Jayme. Yeah, everything comes out of DOD and the CIA, everything. And you just can't get funding, you can't get anything without that impetus. Okay.
I mean,
and then you can't sustain it without
what about
that.
MySpace? MySpace wasn't destroyed by it was destroyed because it just wasn't providing a service.
No, it's
that people
destroyed
wanted
because
to
it didn't
use.
get the sunlight. It didn't get the magic dust. Okay. The magic
MySpace
dust.
MySpace was bigger than Facebook for
It was
very
great.
long time.
I used it. It was very good for my band at the time. I loved
Mhm.
it. And matter of fact, musicians and artists and really heavily used
I think they still do
MySpace.
use it. I think it still exists for the music space, but it's just not.
Nobody uses it. But
Yeah.
I did an article in 2018 where I looked at the origins of Facebook. I looked at the origins of Google, and I found the DOD and the CIA all over it, with the initial funders, with the initial and subsequent funding, and different operations that were done, and different programs that they ran. So yeah, if you dig deep, you'll find the origins are very suspicious. So
Well, I don't doubt for a second when they see something that's working, they jump on it and then
okay,
push
we'll
it.
leave it at that.
I believe that they do that a
We'll leave
lot
it
of
at that.
times.
Yeah, we'll
But
leave it at that.
to think that it's hard for me to believe that they actually started it from scratch. But I absolutely can believe they saw something that was working and they jumped on it and kind of took it over and turned it into something.
Well,
that they
Peter
wanted it to
Thiel
be.
doesn't just fund anything, and to get on his map,
Well, yeah,
you have
I
to
mean,
have something he wants.
and
And
Zuckerberg
yes,
doesn't exactly come from like a nobody family. It's like they weren't not a big family, but it wasn't exactly unconnected.
well, I'm sure it was, and certainly he was getting tutoring in code, and it's just remarkable how the code he was tutored in turned out to be the code of Facebook, and it's also miraculous that this tutor doesn't exist. I could not find the tutor to Mark Zuckerberg.
Mhm.
I couldn't
And
find him.
you think he's an agent of some sort?
I think he was on payroll, and
Mhm.
I think his father was somehow connected. So you can look into it. We can see. Who knows? But I'd like for one of our or someone in our audience to do some research on Mark Zuckerberg's tutor that his father got him, who taught him how to do code, and what happened to him, because that
Now,
is the question that is not answered.
and I'd also like our audience to get the hell off of Facebook. Just quit using it. It's a lot easier than you think. I quit in 2021. I just walked away cold turkey. And I thought it was going to be tough because everything's connected to it. But like 3 days later, I didn't care anymore. I was like,
Good.
there's really no withdrawal from this anymore. So I just stopped using it. It's very easy to do. If the people who really matter that need to contact you, they'll find a way to contact you. Now you don't even have to nuke your profile. Just stop using it. Just like, because you might need something from it later. Like actually, I logged onto it for the first time in probably over a year, a couple weeks ago, just because I wanted to find some pictures I couldn't find, and they were still there. So thankfully, I was able to get those. So I got in there, got the pictures I wanted, and got the hell out. But you can just stop using it, and that's not good for Facebook, because you're not feeding it into their ad stuff. You're not adding more information to their database they have on you, which they already have, and they're never going to lose it. So just quit using it. It's very easy, and you will be a little bit happier. I mean, I was actually felt better after I quit using Facebook, and I highly recommend it to everybody. Just quit it. Quit it. It's very easy to do. It's not like smoking. So anyway, do we have anything else we want to chat about, or get the
No,
hell,
I think
hell out of
that's
here?
good. Yeah, I had an article I was going to post it. It's one I wrote in 2018 on Facebook and Google, where I researched them and their relationship and color revolutions and all that. I can't seem to pull it up though quickly. Let's see, maybe I can get it here. Let's see, maybe I have it up.
Yeah, I was kind of a late adopter to Facebook. Because I was adamant about MySpace for a long time, and then the user experience on MySpace was so bad. It's just everybody's like, you gotta go to Facebook. It's so much better over there. But I was an early adopter to Twitter. I mean, I jumped on that as soon as I heard about it, and then I barely ever use it.
Okay, I'm trying to find this. Here we go. I think I got it. Yeah, I got it. All right. Now, you can put this up. This is an article I wrote in 2018 under a pen name. Let's see.
Are you going to share it in the private
Yeah, I
chat?
just put it. Yeah, you can put it up if you want to put it up.
All right. Let's see. Here we go. It's really tiny. All right. So
It's called Fighting. Go ahead.
Fighting U.S. Psychological Operations, PSYOPs, and Cyber Warfare and Winning. New WKO, what is WKOG ad? What is that?
I don't know, but just keep going down.
Okay. National Endowment for Democracy.
These are just
okay.
codes.
I thought it was a subs.
Yeah, there's the photo.
Did you guys make that?
No. The publisher did, but I like the tagline. I wrote the tagline.
The CIA, NSA, FBI, and DOD are your friends on Facebook. Well, yeah, I do believe that. There's a lot of people on there that are just working for those agencies.
And you could read the beginning part, but I mean, I guess our audience can't. Why don't you read it? Why don't you read the beginning part? It's good.
All right, let me make it bigger. Social media and Google serve three strategic purposes for the United States government. First, they allow Washington to conduct espionage. Second, they facilitate the spread of disinformation campaigns. And third, they serve the conduits for the transmission of social contagions. In deploying the thought control against the users of social media and Google, the U.S. government regulates civil unrest both domestic and abroad. As such, social media and Google can best be understood as unconventional weapons. In this capacity, they can be used in proxy wars against the governments of non-compliant, non-aligned movements. Non-compliant, non-aligned movement nations to accomplish regime change.
You could go to the next paragraph and then that's it. Let's call it a day.
All right. Through geopolitical manipulations that eliminate opposition, the United States government can actualize the ruling elite's vision of a corporate-controlled global economy without the deployment of troops. This model of nonviolence or soft coup is a method of unconventional warfare that can be traced to Gene Sharp and the Albert Einstein Institution. It is organized through the efforts of the NGOs and it oversees, such as Freedom House and the National Endowment for Democracy. And it can be observed in the various color revolutions that occurred in the Eastern European countries, the Middle East, and now Latin America.
Okay, that's good. I suggest you read the article. I go really into details as the origin of Google, the origins of Facebook, and I wrote this in 2018.
And there's the very generic Lauren Smith.
Yes, yes. So yeah, it's
But
fun.
that's everything that Jeremy talks about and studies, and he's a real expert on all this stuff.
Well, that's how Jeremy and I got together. I was writing for Covert Action magazine.
Man, maybe you should make a book that's just like the manual, the playbook manual of how this is done. And I mean, maybe it doesn't even need to be a whole book, like a pamphlet.
Well, in the article, I use the techniques that NED recommends. I list them, and it's apparent to anyone who looks at it.
I know once you see it, you can't stop seeing it.
It's just that most people don't look at it, or they don't want to. I think the bigger thing that I find with people is they don't want to see, because it's cognitive dissonance. If you see these things, then you're never the same, and people don't want to change. They want to believe a certain narrative because it gives them comfort. And not having that narrative and not experiencing that comfort is so they're terrified. But the reality is, this fear of knowledge is another psyop against us. I mean, understanding things.
You're happier. Ignorance is bliss. You're happier if you don't know.
Well, that's what we're told. When the reality is, if you're being cheated, if you're being harassed, knowing who is harassing you and who is cheating you is important. And understanding that this cheating and harassment isn't your fault, but is a organized strategy to control you and take things from you. So, there's a lot of psyop that goes on. And, I hope with our show and our discussions, such as this, Jayme, that our audience is able to, see the psyop and to stand back and isn't afraid to, consider things that might appear unpleasant, but are really, it's a bitter medicine. Okay. And I think that's how we have to look at it. The truth is a bitter medicine, but it's a medicine and it heals. So I think, that's where we want to go with this.
Yeah. I had a point and then I forgot what it was.
Okay.
Man. Because
next week.
There's it was a good point too. Darn it. It'll come back to me probably after we end the show. But yeah, I just think it's this was what it's easier to fool someone than it is to convince them they've been fooled.
Yes.
And that's the principle that's coming out that you're describing here. And you combine that with ignorance is bliss. You don't want to be convinced that you've been fooled. You never want, even if you are fooled and you suspect it, you don't want to know the truth, because you're just going to be happy if you remain ignorant. And for a lot of people, it's just, they're good with that. They might know they're in the matrix, but they don't want to know they're in the matrix, and they don't want to leave. They're not going to choose the blue pill, or they're going to choose the blue pill and stay in. They're not going to take the red pill and leave. Once you see it, you can't stop seeing it.
Right. But I also think the fear that's cultivated by, the deep state is intentional to make us not want to see the truth or not be prepared for the truth. Like, all right, Jeremy and I talk a lot about our educational system, on how, I don't know, when we went to school, or I went to school, there was more philosophy classes, there was more history, there was just a wider range of information that we studied, and it was called the liberal arts education. Now everything is really sectionalized into a career op. So,
Mhm.
you go to be
Oh,
a dental assistant, or you go to
yeah.
be a dentist, or you go to be an attorney or tax accountant, there, and you don't really consider anything outside of a very narrow set of courses. And the goal is to keep people from thinking, is to keep people so busy and so on a treadmill that they're not able to, stand back and look. So then when they get in situations that require them to stand back and look, they're uncomfortable because they
Mhm.
haven't built those muscles. They haven't developed that type of ability to do that level of analysis.
Yeah.
So
And,
you have to train, to be, to have critical analysis. You just can't have it one
yes,
day. You work up
absolutely.
to
And
it.
I think that was something they did a better job of teaching in schools when we were in school, even into the early 90s.
Yeah.
And they don't do that anymore. They don't teach critical thinking at all. It was encouraged for our generation, I
Yeah.
believe. And but somewhere around the late 90s, 2000s, it stopped. They
There used
just
to
they
be
they
debate
they
clubs,
they started
and
to discourage critical thinking. And and then a lot of it really changed around 9/11. Like everything changed around 9/11. And I don't think like young people understand that. Like even people who were born just before 9/11, they don't know how much the world changed. And there's a lot of things that just people accept with involving surveillance and things like that. Well, that's just the way things is, and we need it for security. Like, no, we don't. It was so much
agree.
better before, and we're actually safer before, and they just don't understand it because they've been living with it their entire lives.
Well
Um,
said.
yeah. So I am in space where I interact with people who are in their 20s and even like in their 30s, or early 30s and 20s, and they don't know. I mean, these people like 25 now. You're 24 years old if you were born on 9/11. I mean, you are on the verge of becoming a full-fledged adult, right? Because your brain is almost fully developed, and you just don't know what life was like and how different it was. You've been born into a life where we're much more imprisoned than we were before, so you don't know anything of what it's like to live not being imprisoned.
Well, I think that was a real watershed moment, with the Patriot Act in particular.
Yeah.
But I also think the COVID narrative really messed up our young people because, they were in school, and all of a sudden now they're
Mhm.
told they have to be afraid of their friends, they have to be afraid of their parents, they have to hate themselves if they give their grandparent a virus.
Yeah,
The
it's taking stranger danger to the next level.
it really, and then kids were isolated for years and unable to develop their social interactions. I mean, that was huge,
Mhm.
and then this whole concept of 6 feet apart and wearing masks and not showing your emotions. I mean, the whole thing was really, just a very dangerous psyop that has, I think made people feel much more comfortable complying than not complying. I mean, people were told if they didn't comply, they would be dead and they would kill their
Yeah.
families.
Or
So that
yeah,
that's
yeah, you're
so that's
either die or you'd kill your loved ones. And
so
yeah.
so I
And that
mean,
was a very powerful narrative.
exactly. And so I think that is, I don't think we're even seeing really the damage that caused, because this generation is now, kind of coming to age. And but it really, it was a terrible impact. And they knew it. This was, the social engineering, you know, for our audience, everyone really should be comfortable and familiar with the concepts of social engineering, and also Tavistock and all of this stuff, and how we are, basically taught how to think through fear. Fear is one of the techniques used to control our thoughts. So,
Oh yeah.
we must
And,
be brave.
and I mean, they've been using fear tactics ever since I can remember being politically aware as a teenager. Um, going back to the late 80s, early 90s. So you could see it then, and then it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. 9/11, though, it was like you jumped off a cliff, and then it just got really bad after that. Um, but
Well,
it wasn't that bad. It wasn't life was not the way it is now before 9/11. I mean, and I
want to take one step back. We've always been propagandized. I mean,
yes.
one of my earliest memories as a child was watching Bullwinkle Moose. And on Bullwinkle Moose, the antagonists were Boris, Bad Enough, and Natasha.
Yeah.
And they were clearly Russian assets. And they were spent KGB, and they were spending all of their efforts trying to harm the beloved Bullwinkle Moose and Rocky the Flying Squirrel. And so basically, I was taught since early childhood that the Russians were bad. And so was every American kid taught the same message.
But funny thing was, in the 80s, that started to change. In the 80s, the narrative did change. I remember because we became a lot softer on the 80s before the Berlin Wall came down. Like the older people, I remember because I was still like a kid, like 10 years old to teenage years in the 80s. And my age group did not have the same fear of Russia that people in their 30s and 40s had, and 50s. And I'm sure a lot of it had to do with going through like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Probably had a big to do with that. But I do remember that the position of America on Russia had softened tremendously by the late 80s.
I don't know. Pasta always talks about watching one of the Rocky movies, and they were boxers, and one was from Russia. And
yeah, they did. Yeah,
I think that was the 80s, right?
Wasn't but 80s? The propaganda was still there, but the sentiment amongst people was not. We didn't have the hatred for Russia that I think the earlier generations did.
Well, my generation, I'm not sure, I think it might be the same. We weren't, hating Russia because of Bullwinkle Moose. It's an implant. These things are implants. They go into your psyche. This is psychological operations. You don't necessarily go, okay, Boris, Bad Enough, and Natasha are going to get me. But that seed is planted in your head that the good guys are the Americans. They're the Bullwinkle Moose, they're the Rocky the Flying Squirrel, and the bad guys are the Russians. So these are implanted. And these, kind of these narratives are just put in there. And the same thing with the Rocky movie.
It was there. It was always there. But like my generation was able, because I think we had more critical thinking skills. We were able to look at that and think it was a joke and say, look at this. We could identify that as propaganda.
Well, the other thing is it shifts back and forth between the Russians and the Chinese. Like when we think about all the Bond villains, okay? I mean, think of the Bond villains. They're, Russian or they're Chinese, they're Asian. I mean, this narrative is just, it's imbued in everything. And it doesn't necessarily have to give us fear. But then when they add, the Russians just blew this up, we go, oh yeah, it's those Russians. Yeah, they're always blowing stuff up. I remember,
there was Red Dawn. Remember Red Dawn? Russia invades North America, and we love that movie.
You'll pull out a lot if you go through it. You'll see
I know. We love that movie, but we also knew it was a joke. It's like there's no way the Russians would ever do this. So the idea was, I think by the late 80s, a lot of that anti-Russian propaganda was breaking down. We were seeing through it, and the anti-Russian sentiment definitely was softening by the end because there was love for Gorbachev, and then the Berlin Wall fell, and then a lot of Americans wanted to be their friends, even though our government still wanted to destroy Russia after that. But we didn't know that at the time. But it seemed like
if you speak to a lot of people about Ukraine and Russia, they will go on how Putin is the devil and how Russia is today. So I mean,
for 2014, no.
But these things were, they did in 2014 is when they did the maiden coup. So
but before that, Russia and Ukraine were working together on stuff. They were buddy.
Yeah, that was before the United States overthrew their government. Yeah,
right. And you did not have the anti-Russian sentiment in Ukraine like there is today back then. I mean, you still had the people in the West who always hate Russia,
No,
And
no,
but
there were always problems, because there was always this element of ultra right wing fascism in Ukraine, because you have the Banderites, and they date back quite a bit. So
mhm.
yeah, there's always been problems, but anyway, let's call it a show, and get on with our stuff, and
Yeah.
we'll reconvene next week, people.
Well, I'm just sharing my perspective, like,
Yeah,
because
thank
like
you.
I was, I didn't really become politically aware until I was around 12 or 13 years old, where I started caring about what politics was. Um, but that was just the general feeling I remember. It's like we didn't hate Russia, but now we do, and I think it's insane. But, all right, with that, let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. I'm Jayme. This is Gloria, and thank you to Jeremy for joining us earlier and bringing all of his expertise. This has been Left on Left. I hope you enjoyed it in this post-show discussion. We'll be back next week with another episode, a big one. We're going to probably promote it a little bit earlier. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.